loves to chew. Oh, hey. I didn't see you there. So, welcome to the Bearded Blade. I'm going to build something for you today.
To start with, we gather all of our lumber for the frame. And here I'm actually measuring out all the cuts that I'm going to do for the frames. The frames of this are going to come in two pieces. So we're going to have a top and bottom frame for this that are cut at a total of 69 inches across. I'm going for about 2 feet high for this stand. I want it to be wide enough for a 65 or 70 inch TV, and you want the console to actually be longer than the television is. Here you can see I'm trying to make sure that all of my measurements are good, double checking them so that when I do my cuts, I can do all the cuts on the framing lumber for this. The frame is built in two pieces, a top and bottom, and these are built out of 2x3s. Once I got all of the measurements done, I brought it over to my saw and I'm going to cut these on the miter saw. I just think it's a little easier than using the table saw for these kind of cross cuts like this. So measure, make sure the blade lines up on my cuts. I'm trying to make sure we take our time so that we can cut it right the first time. And I go to cut it here and notice that something's a little wrong. What could that be? Well, as it turns out, I forgot to plug this in. Another benefit of having everything in the new shop, I didn't plug everything in just yet. Now getting back to it here, I just start doing all the cuts for this. I start by cutting the 4 pieces that I need for the longest ends, which are 4 at 69 inches. Then I cut 4 more at 14 inches and 4 more at 17. So the 17-inch pieces are going to go on either end of the 69-inch pieces. The 14-inch pieces are going to go in between as supports. Alright, so now that we got all our pieces, we grab our drill and we start putting our pocket holes in. You actually only need to have pocket holes on the 4 supports that you're doing in the middle. And that's because the pieces that are going to be on the end caps, you don't really want to do with pocket holes. You could, I suppose, but I think it's just easier to not do that. After I started doing the first few here, I realized that I should have actually clamped down my pocket hole jig because everything was kind of wiggling on me. So rookie mistake there. And as you can see, it starts going a lot faster once I actually get everything locked down so it's not moving on me. Next we get our drill and we grab some glue and we start trying to do a little glue up. So I just filled this up with some glue. It was a condiment dispenser actually, and I realized as I tried to put it on here that the hole's pretty small on there. I cut it and it didn't work. I cut it again, it didn't work. I cut it a 3rd time and then that finally was wide enough that the glue was able to work its way through there. I had these corner clamps that work great for building picture frames and used them here to kind of hold the stuff in place for me as I glued it up, and then used some deck screws actually to drill it all the way in to really like hold these pieces together. And with the one side complete, I just do the same for the other. So try to make sure that these are about as square as you can get them to begin with. And I had everything lifted up off of my workbench a little bit so that nothing actually got glued down to my work table, which would be terrible. Got another corner clamp here. Drill it in to hold everything in place. And once I have this one side done, I did the same to the other and then started figuring out where I was going to put these middle supports. I put them at about 23 inches in from either side, so that puts it at roughly a 1/3 of the size of it. And that worked out pretty well. Once I got this in here, I had to kind of hammer it in a little bit to really make sure that it fit, because it was a tight fit. And along with hammering these in, once I got it into a good spot, then I used the pocket holes that we put in earlier and just drilled this in to hold it in place. And you just have to do this 3 more times. Once more on this particular bottom frame and then again on the top frame. They are identical, so all the steps you see here, just duplicate them again for your top frame. You know, one other important thing to note here too is when you're putting these in, especially when you're hammering them in like this, that you check to make sure that everything is square. It's really easy to just look at it and be like, oh yeah, that looks right, but as you actually check it with your speed square, it turns out that they're off just a little bit. So I had to go back and forth a bunch, hammering this in just a little bit every so often until it got right to where I wanted it to be, and then started to screw these in. Next up, we're cutting plywood to make the sides for the TV stand. So I just used the frame and cut them down from there with my circular saw. Here, I'm cutting it down a little bit more so that I can reach their final size, which is going to be 17¼ by 24 inches. When you're cutting, make sure there's nothing behind the table saw, because that's what can happen if you don't pay attention. And then the final cuts here to make them the exact size. And next up here, now we start gluing them on. This is pretty easy. Just spread some glue on, clamp it down. Next on our cut list is the back piece. The back is going to be 72 inches by 24 inches. And now some more cutting. So this is for the face frame. The face frame is made up of a few different pieces. There's 4 cuts that we did at 19 3/4, 2 at 20 inches, and 4 at 24 inches. That's going to be our pieces that go all the way across, the 4 pieces at 24. Here I already did one of the setups, and I'm doing the next one here. When putting these together, it's really important to always make sure that everything is square, because otherwise when you try to install your face frame, it will be at an angle and it will look really terrible. Once you finish with the face frame, start gluing it back up. Here I'm just spraying glue everywhere, and I'm going to try to make sure that it's a really nice tight fit. And you're also going to want to put brad nails into it when you're done. After that, I used some wood filler to fill the edges and the cracks along the sides and the front, and then use a stop block here on my fence. This is called a temporary fence, and you set this up so you can make some quick cuts without having to run the piece of wood alongside your fence when you're making a cross cut, because what can happen is it can bind up and shoot out at you. I just set it at the length that I needed, and then when I push it away, it doesn't run along the fence the entire way. And I had to do a few cuts here. These were for the cleats for the shelves, so they were all going to be the same size. I just knew that I was going to use a stop block to make it a little faster for myself. After that, I started painting using this paint sprayer, which fortunately didn't do a great job. I had to go over it with a brush in a lot of places actually to clean it up. I don't know if this ended up saving me any time at all. And here I'm putting those cleats onto the shelves. So I did this while the paint was drying and clamped these down. While the glue is drying, I also worked on the bottom shelves. These bottom shelves actually don't have cleats underneath them, so you just glue them down into place. My son decided to come out and help me. He's having a good time, but he got a little scared of the nail gun. And these are pretty quick and easy to install, just a couple of brad nails each. And I realized as I was putting the shelf in that it didn't quite fit. It was just a teeny tiny bit too wide. I sanded it down a little more and then pushed it in, and my son used the mallet here to hammer it in. He got tired of that pretty quick, so I could take over. Next up, cutting for the actual top of the TV stand. For these, I used the 2x10s. I cut these at 75 inches. This is so that there's a little bit of overhang on either side. And I also shaved down the sides of it a little bit because these boards were a little tiny bit bowed actually. Unfortunately, I had to trim them down a little to straighten them out a bit. This also made it so that there wasn't enough material to hang over on the front anymore, and I should have thought of that and got actually a third board and just made sure that it was going to fit. Or just use 2x12s I guess next time. Lots and lots of sanding, using a tack cloth afterward, and then we get to staining. The stain here I thought looked kind of terrible at first actually, and then I realized my problem was that I hadn't shaken the can up before I started using it. After I shook it up, came out looking a lot better, and then I did a couple more coats, started looking really shiny and nice. This stuff actually is stain and polyurethane in one. I'd never used that before, but it actually turned out looking pretty good, which you'll see at the end. While those were drying, I used the trim pieces here to start doing a bit of a glue up and get those situated as well. I actually forgot something kind of important here. I had to do another set of crosscuts for the front face because I realized that I forgot to cut the pieces for the middle shelf to make it look like the middle shelf is a little thicker. Separately, I had to cut these, sand them all down, paint them, and then put them in after the fact. If you're following along, make sure you don't make the same mistake as me, because it's a whole lot easier to put these in the first time and as opposed to trying to fit them in after the fact. And now finally, I get to put the top shelf on, start to get to see how it really actually looks. I think this turned out pretty good. The top is really glossy, it's a really warm color, I like it a lot. And here you can see where I started fitting in the pieces for the shelf here. I just put a brad nail on either side through it, which held it in place because it was already painted, so I couldn't glue them in. And there you have it. I think this turned out pretty good looking. It's a really big TV stand because it's fitting a pretty large TV that we have, and it is pretty heavy, so make sure you have somebody to help you carry this thing in from your garage. Let me know what you think.